I try to do Van Gogh in 3 words. This is like 8 or 9, but I said obsessive, troubled, spoiled, insane, delusional, inspired. And
I think they discovered they both had syphilis and kind of bonded.
It was this idea that he was like a tortured poet, and he, to quote Taylor Swift,
I'm just so excited for Phil's hot take.
Maybe this is bad to say. Okay, I'm going to say it.
Let's go beyond the first page. Let's go beyond the first
page. Welcome back, second pagers. This is Beyond the First Page with siblings Phoebe, Isaac, and Phil. I'm Phoebe.
I'm Phil.
And I'm Isaac.
And today we are talking about everything Vincent van Gogh in Van Gogh, The Life by Stephen Knife and Gregory White-Smith. And before we get started, as always, this is just a plug to follow us on Spotify, follow us on Instagram and YouTube, and feel free to give us a 5-star rating if you enjoyed the podcast. And if you're looking for our full book list, that'll be posted on our YouTube as well as our Instagram. And that's just all the books we plan on reading this year. Also, I wanted to mention before we get into it, it's a little different with the biography, but we will be discussing major plot points and spoilers from throughout the book. However, I'm sure some of our listeners are fairly familiar with Vincent van Gogh and how he met his demise. So that'll obviously be discussed in this book podcast. And we just want to give you the bottom line up front that we will be talking about spoilers from throughout the book. And we like to, before we get started in talking about the book in 60 seconds, we like to talk a little bit about an icebreaker to get us into really talking about books. And so today that topic is what we would write if we ever wrote a book. And so, Isaac, I'm curious what you would write if you ever wrote a book.
So I would probably write a book about as a sales pitch for the city of Oklahoma City. I think the cat is maybe out of the bag a little bit. A lot of people are moving here still, but I would write I'm unsure of the form yet, but it would eventually be a clever way to pitch why you should live in Oklahoma City. Be that a travel rec, based on real life character kind of traveling around, like a Bosch-esque, but not as clever. Probably not murder mystery.
Also less murder.
Yeah. So not like a murder mystery, but following an avatar through Oklahoma City to expose a lot of the cool spots.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
The mystery is why this city is so cool.
Yeah.
Oh my God. That's a good one. You'd be perfect
I
for
like
that.
Yeah.
Phil, what about you?
That's really unique too, because I think Phoebe and I are going to say pretty much the same thing. I would love to write a fantasy series, but I think Phoebe has better ideas for that. So I think at this point, I would really like to write like an economics book. I did write a book for my job. I didn't do as much of the writing, but I did a decent amount of the writing and research for a book that's probably like 140 pages about economic metrics that's sort of meant for a popular audience. And I think I'd like to do something like that for sort of like pop economics.
Yeah, I mean, and also just a shout out to you, Phil. You have a big week this week. He got married. He started his PhD in economics. And so I think that a book could really be in your future, Phil, with that in economics. Yeah. So that's plausible.
And I have a midterm tomorrow, so
so we'll wish him luck. Leave
fun.
us a comment about wish Phil luck on that.
How that goes.
I would write a murder mystery fantasy, but Phil, I think you talked about, and remind me the name of that book.
It's Justice of Kings by Richard Swan.
Yeah, so I'm curious to read Justice of Kings by Richard Swan because he kind of stole my idea, except he did it first, so I'm stealing his idea now. But I think that would just be, it's like my 2 favorite genres combined, so I would try to do that. So Isaac was saying right before we started filming that we should all expose ourselves a little bit about our bad writing ideas because we will get into Van Gogh and the writing for this particular book and maybe not have the most positive things to say. But before we do that, Isaac, will you just give us Van Gogh in 60 seconds and not 44 hours?
Yes, so this is Van Gogh, the life in 60 seconds. Vincent van Gogh had a great grandfather. His great grandfather had his father, and then his father had him. He was a troubled child and a troubled man with many failed ventures, from art sales to a religious leader, and then finally art, which he never lived to see any real fame. He died of a gunshot wound to the chest, a supposed suicide with some contradicting evidence of how the event of the attempted killing really went down.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's the book. And it did not need to be 44 hours, but we'll share a little bit more of our sentiment throughout. Obviously, this is a chance for us to kind of talk about some different things other than just what we didn't like. And so I think for the three of us, something that really stood out was this idea of it that Vincent van Gogh really got hung up on. And I tried to kind of boil him down just to set our listeners even more. I tried to do Van Gogh in 3 words. This is like 8 or 9, but I said obsessive, troubled, spoiled, insane, delusional, inspired. And there was a quote in the book that one of his fellow artists said that he was truly ugliness personified. And I think, I don't know if you guys had any other words, but I wanted to talk about, so that's Van Gogh, right? That to me was really him. And I think one of these kind of, obsessive things that he had, to use the word that I characterized him as, was this idea of it. Like these people had it, these peasants had it, the miners that he was painting and observing had it. And I wanted to read an excerpt to try to get us started on that topic of not only what we took from that, but then also kind of talking about, for us, it's a chance to think about what is it to us. So this is the excerpt. Finally, through the sheer power of his imagination, Vincent emerged from the Bourget with his vision of it intact, undimmed by the years of setbacks and suffering. My inner self, he told Theo, has not changed. I think, believe, and love more seriously now what I thought, believed, and loved then. Consolation remained the ultimate goal, truth the ultimate medium, and sorrow the ultimate redemptive sentiment. His imagination was already busy transforming his years of exile and misery into the stuff of it, the inner sorrow that he found in the works of artists he admired. And so to Vincent van Gogh, it was the inner sorrow. That's what I took from that passage. I wondered what you guys thought he thought it was, or if you could kind of describe it, and what that was very telling about him as a person, I think.
Yeah. So was one of your words volatile, Phoebe?
No.
I think I would add volatile and passionate. I think you had inspired, which is good, but obsessive and passionate, I think, are also true in addition to inspired. And I think volatile is true as well.
Yeah, for sure.
I think that he is. I think it was this idea that he was like a tortured poet, and he, to quote Taylor Swift, and he wanted to be that. He was attached to the idea of what we refer to as like a starving artist,
Right.
of like this tortured soul that needs expression. And I think for him, then, it almost seems, and I don't want to be too harsh, because something was right, because he's Vincent van Gogh.
Right.
And we just did finish a book about
Right.
him. But he seems like this snobby child that is just like, I need to be in pain. And I think that was also part of this mental complex that he had of just, I need to torture myself. He would take these 7-8 hour walks and starve himself. And it wasn't even, when I first read that, and sorry, I'm going on a little bit, but when I first read that, I thought that it was an idea that he like either need to punish himself, or he thought he could access a deeper meaning of art through that. But I don't think it was. Like, it seemed pointless. It's not like he went on a bout of painting after those, or it's not like he tried to connect with God after those. It was really just like, I'm just gonna eat bread for 3 months and do nothing with that.
Yeah. And I think too, you had said, Phil, was this a nature versus nurture? And I thought it was nature. I thought he had a lot of undiagnosed at the time, but now I think later on people have diagnosed him with many different things, including epilepsy, potentially schizophrenia. But then you hear about all his siblings who also, I mean, I think every single one of them ended tragically. One was institutionalized. Theo had a mental break after he died. His brother was also killed himself. So yeah, I didn't know what to think by the end of it, honestly. And I think, Isaac, you had thought, we had previously talked about this. You had thought this was a nature thing solely, but did the ending with his siblings also kind of ending in this way, did that change anything for you?
I never thought it was purely nature. I think his upbringing had a lot to do with it.
Okay.
They, a good portion at the beginning of the book broke down the relationship with especially his mom, and he'd had this, it was obsessed with the maternal character um, in spouts, but throughout his entire life, and all that was one of the characters. There was this in the sewer, which was like his father, that he would keep going back to as images.
Right.
And there was something I wrote down in the beginning when I was still trying to take notes, then realized I had 45 more hours and couldn't keep doing this. But the mom taught them that after every good thing, there is a bad thing. That's a bizarre thing to teach your kids.
Yeah.
The
suffering.
Because of her, they all had this idea of kind of a self-hatred for just not being what they thought they could be or what they thought they should be. So I don't think that set him up well at all. I think obviously he had a lot of stuff. All the sexually transmitted diseases that affected
Right.
his brain also didn't help. Yeah, I think his upbringing had definitely a lot to do with it. And when Phil was talking about, I also found the self-punishment pretty weird. Like, he was kind of doing like I'm sure a lot of our listeners have seen the Michael Jordan documentary. I cannot think of what it's called right now on Netflix, but it's really
The Last
good.
Dance.
Is
The
it
Last Dance, yeah. And there's so many examples of people being like, yeah, Michael would just make up these vendettas with people just to spur him on. And it seemed like that was the kind of thing Van Gogh was like trying to do in a different way. But he was trying to access that, that suffering, but then he just never did anything with it.
Right.
Like Phil said, he definitely made himself suffer. He slept in the cold for no reason. He did all this stuff, but then he was so removed from actual what he was trying to get to that he never did anything with the suffering that he put himself through. And that's what kind of made me think like, oh, this guy is like such like a little brat because he's having to self induce this pain and then he's just not using it. And so that was a frustrating part of his character.
And I think that just one thing, like, we're not saying that greatness is achieved by suffering. Like, that's self punishment and flatulence. Like, that is not like greatness or a good thing at all. But it was weird to us because I think we could, like, in The Last Dance, you at least like, this is why he's trying to do it. Like, this is weird, but this makes a little bit of sense.
I think his obsession with it ended up being kind of unfounded. I mean, he found it, but then he didn't do anything with it, exactly like what you guys are saying. And to just tie back the it point, I think that he was always creating, exactly like you said, Isaac, these vendettas and the suffering that it amounted. I mean, maybe it did amount to something. Maybe he was inspired in his work by it and he became famous because of that. But you didn't see the correlation at all in this book, at least.
It kind of like fell off. Like he eventually became a full-time artist, didn't do anything still when he was living, but you didn't hear about the It 2/3 of the way after the book ended.
But I was wondering if you guys thought that was Vincent, or you thought that was Stephen Knife just dropping the ball here. Because I do think a little bit that he made such a big deal about, oh, this is when he first latched on to it. And then Isaac, you're right, he never brought it up again. And I think another example of that was the mother at the beginning of the book. I think an hour, if you had to stop the book in an hour and say, which one of these parents from this introduction is going to affect Vincent the most, you'd say his mom.
Mm-hmm.
He starts off hard. His mom really affected him. Drops it, talks about his dad the entire time.
Yeah.
So I don't know if he just dropped the ball or just wrote this over 10 years and forgot what he wrote at the beginning. I just don't.
Or maybe there was a disconnect.
think,
I was thinking this too, because we're kind of bringing up our second point, and we can circle back at the end. I wanted to hear just from a sibling's perspective what you guys thought it was to you. But to go into your point, Phil, I think, or maybe there was a disconnect of authors, because there's two authors, and it kind of did feel like they both had a lot of things they wanted to include in the narrative, and maybe that's why it made it so long and also felt disjointed a little bit.
Wait, did they say they wrote different parts? Like, was there a distinct cut or no?
No, I don't know at all. I'm just
no.
wondering if these two authors really didn't get on the same page about things they wanted to include, and then it was very disjointed. I'm just thinking of a reason as to why certain things fell off, and then his mom never went to visit him. Basically, once her husband died, did not have a relationship at all with him. Yeah, but that was never really mentioned.
Right.
I think it could be a combo. His art definitely changed. The objects of his art changed. He went from drawings to black and white to all about the color.
Right.
And there definitely was not the talk of kind of the self-suffering and that idea of trying to paint those suffering at the end of the book. Once he moves out of Paris to this, or essentially all of his time in France at the end of his life was kind of switched. And there's so many moments you're like, oh, he's going to listen to Theo, the guy who is selling art of what to paint. And then he doesn't. You're like, I can't even root for him.
Yeah.
He's not even trying to do something that will make him successful.
But then the huge disconnect there was, I don't know if you guys remember, I remember just where I was when I heard this, and I was like, what is happening? Where they were living together in Paris. I think they were in Paris, or they could have been in The Hague. And the author goes, and Theo turned to obviously his connoisseur in art, Vincent. And I was like, what?
To start the impressionist side sale thing.
Right.
Yeah, and it was just like obviously he turned to Vincent.
This man was not in any way a credible source for anything.
Yeah.
I think they discovered they both had syphilis and kind of bonded. I think that was the only thing bonding them together. They're like, wow, we both have this really bad disease.
Yeah.
Let's keep that a secret, but keep doing what we're doing because we're really enjoying what got us this syphilis. And then they became homies again. That's like the only thing I could think of.
But it really doesn't make any sense.
I think it was undeniable he loved him. I mean, I know in the Vincent van Gogh Museum, they painted that he died of a broken heart. I think he really died of syphilis, but it kind of overtook him. But the timing was a bit odd to me. About 6 months after Vincent died, he died.
Well, I think Theo, yes, died of a lot of syphilis stuff, but I think he had a lot of guilt. He really kind of blew off Vincent at the end. Like, they had gotten kind of tight. He had supported him his entire life. Vincent was just starting to kind of make this acclaim from that article about him. And I think Theo had this guilt for blowing him off and not kind of taking care of him, kind of just trying to send him to the loony bin, and also trying to maneuver him to start selling so he could make his money back, which, like, from a business perspective you can understand, but someone that's your brother, like, you're gonna feel bad when he ends up dying.
You're using them. Yeah.
for like using him that way, even though he was used too.
Yeah,
Theo was
100%.
abused.
Like so much.
But he lived longer than Vincent, so I think he had
But
a lot of guilt.
but not actually, because he was younger than him. I mean, in time he lived longer than him, but he
No,
was
Yeah.
younger than him, which was
Yeah,
also
that's
really
true.
sad. Yeah. Yeah. I had a quote Vincent said to Theo, personally, you aren't of the slightest use to me. Like this man, like you guys are talking about, just he was so. I did actually I really felt a lot of empathy for him. I think he was an extremely unlikable character in this book and in his own life. I mean, nobody liked him. Not even his own brother loved him out of.
the tough thing was when the kids would follow him
Yeah,
around and
that's
make
where
fun of him.
I
Yeah, it was
finally
sad.
was like,
Yeah.
oh, I feel bad.
Yeah.
But up till then, I was like, it's very
This
hard
guy.
to even root for him.
Yeah. Well, and then
Yeah.
so the kids thing, I mean, that controversy of him dying, that was very interesting. That talking more about what we could have done differently in this book, I mean, that could have been super interesting to really expound upon that. It sounds like maybe that was the only information they really had, but I thought he died of suicide, and that could have convinced me that he didn't, and I just don't know where I sit on that, and I'm curious what you guys thought at the end of it. So for our listeners, basically at the end they say, you know, years later there was these two guys in the town that he died in, that the one brother was an artist and kind of talked to Vincent, and then there was another brother who kind of antagonized him with his group of friends, and the author basically speculates that this gentleman killed him. It was a murder. It wasn't. So he shoots him in the chest. I think it was discovered that there was no way that Vincent inflicted it upon himself, in the chest, not in the head, which is typical of a suicide. Um, yeah, so there was definitely some evidence that he didn't kill himself. And then the martyrdom of him not telling on the boys is perfectly in line with the whole it suffering, you know, being a woe is me troubled artist, you know? Curious to hear what you guys thought about that.
I mean, it definitely would have, undeniably would have made a better book.
Mhm.
Would have read that. I am pretty skeptical of any
Yeah.
old conspiracy theories. I mean, it's very, very, very hard to
Prove that.
prove how anyone
Right.
died, and something that's being thought. Well, not prove that. Prove that he died by suicide. Like prove anything. Like there's the John Wilkes Booth stuff. There's the every conspiracy, and like something coming back 40 years later when he's like semi-famous to me seems pretty obviously
Right.
false, but I would have read the shit out of that book compared to this one.
Yeah.
So
And I think that book, like the conspiracy of his death being the center of the book, and you could still get so much history, a little bit about his art and stuff in there. And yeah, could have been 6 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I agree with Phil. And I don't, maybe this is bad to say. Okay, I'm going to say it. Him dying is the reason he's Vincent van Gogh.
Yeah.
His death, he is Vincent van Gogh because he died. So, like, if you're looking at your legacy as a human being, our very dedicated listeners and us and the other people who are just like to inflict pain upon themselves have read this book. So everyone else just thinks of Vincent van Gogh as this amazing artist that had a tragic end.
Right.
So does it really
so
matter?
wait, I'm
how
sorry.
he
Why
died?
do you say the tragic? I think I agree with you, but for a different reason. I don't think he's famous because of his tragic end per se. I think he's famous because
He died.
the tragic end. No, because the tragic end led to Theo pushing the hell out of his art. I think there was, maybe it was the tragedy is a little bit of a story, but I do think it was more so that when he died, his connections in the art world
Yeah.
felt so bad and tried to push
Yeah.
his art. I think it was a little bit, there's a step in between rather than people just going from the tragedy.
Yeah.
But I do agree with you that without if he would have kept living and died a normal, just not tragic death, I do not think he would have been famous.
Well,
no.
plus people hated him. So I think also he would have like talked
Right.
himself out of being famous. Like he kind of was doing it. He was getting
Right.
some traction. Then he was like, this is too much, basically. I feel bad. I think
Yeah.
I mean, none of us by any means are art connoisseurs. I think he was getting a little bit of traction before he died. I think he probably was a talented artist, but definitely not like you guys are saying on the
I would
scale.
like to talk about that actually, because I think my take. So what I always say in art, in modern art and art where people are like, I could do that.
I'm just so excited for
I'm usually
Phil's
like,
hot take.
I know my
The
hot take.
Lord of the Rings sucking really got a lot of people on the last
that was-
episode.
Yeah. Well, good. It's write a better book, Tolkien. The modern art, I think, is like all about how it makes you feel. But I also think that what's cool about it is that, like, when Picasso does the cubism or he draws like a sketch of a little dove, he was the best artist in the world. He could have done anything. He could have done literally, like, the talent in these people. It's like someone who goes to Juilliard and then just writes some weird music. And you're like, okay, they could have done literally anything. Van Gogh is not good. He went to these schools and they were like, you have no talent. You can't do this. It's just like, it's a little unfortunate that to modern artists who want to not depict something as an image, because I do think everyone that does go on a limb is extremely talented and could paint an incredible portrait or landscape that was amazing, but they choose to do this modern hot take on something. And that was not the case with
He was trying the things that were
he wasn't
working.
talentless, right? But he was inventing new art because he couldn't do the old art,
Which is cool.
not because he was super creative. Is it though? It seems
I feel like I'm going to push back a little bit. I thought one of the coolest parts of the book, there were two parts that I thoroughly enjoyed. And the other one was I thought you were going to talk about. When he is going back and forth with his arguments to Theo, it was super annoying. Theo's like, just do this. Your art will sell if you do these things. And he's like, no. And then he breaks down all the color wheel stuff and the scientific reasoning of color. I don't think he was...
Which was wrong.
No, but I don't know if it was right or wrong. It was like he knew his stuff. That is my point. It wasn't like he was out there just like, trying to be like me, being like, you know what? I've got a successful brother. Throw me 150 francs every month, and I'm just gonna slap some stuff on. So like, he was kind of doing that, but it wasn't from like a point of just nothing. He had the art background. He had the connections to the other artists. He was going to these schools. He wasn't necessarily successful in there. I think that maybe it could be the not being a good student because you're kind of distracted by other stuff or whatever. I think that there was a lot in his head. And I thought you could tell that from a lot of letters of those arguments of his avid fighting for this kind of art, that he had something there. He just was like working towards getting it. So I don't think it's right to say he was bad. I think he was just so different that he had the inability to transition from the art that he was supposed to be making to get people to the art that he wanted. Yeah. And I think the other coolest part of this book was then Theo getting people to that art, and the kind of the breakdown of how the Royals stopped funding artists and it got put on the free market, and how artists became successful artists from there, the networking stuff. I thought that was the other cool part. I think that could have been a book.
So that was going to be, I agree with both of you. I think Van Gogh, I don't think is good because I don't like his art, but that doesn't make him bad. It doesn't speak to me, but I agree. I think Isaac, like I said, one of my words for him was inspired, and he was passionate. He was obsessive about this. He was going to fight for what he thought. And I think you saying that about those Impressionist artists and like the Claude Monet and him being in Paris during that time, I would have loved a book that followed that movement into Van Gogh and then how he was inspired by those artists and then who he inspired. I think that to me would have been a more interesting story. I think all these guys led very interesting lives. You give me a 10-hour book where each, every 2 hours we change artists and we get the full backstory on them. That would have been a much more interesting book, and I would have been much more informed about art, because that's the other thing. We really didn't get into learning about the colors and the style and anything until the very end of the book, and by that you were just praying that this book was over. So I think that would have, for me at least, that would have made it a much better book. I'm curious to hear if either of you had any ideas about how to make this book a little bit better, more enjoyable for the reader.
To make this book better, obviously shorter, I personally think that, and I mentioned this before to you guys, I think we accidentally read a history textbook, and like this book had no narrative. It was better presented as they should have just compiled all the letters and published all the letters. Yeah. So you could read the letters of Vincent van Gogh, because this book was a unfortunate collection of paraphrased letters.
Yeah.
That was no narrative, and just I have no idea how any of this led to Vincent van Gogh. Like, we're discussing how did this lead to Vincent van Gogh's art? Like, that should have been settled by a 45-hour book.
Totally.
And frankly, we have no idea.
Great point, Phil.
Well said.
I got no direction.
What about you, Isaac? Did you have any ideas about how to improve? Again, not that we're authors or have any talent in that realm, but
yeah, I think a more focus. I think I like your idea, Phoebe. The more focus on the art, like and I should have done this, but by the time I thought to do it, I didn't care. But we should have defined what Impressionism was. We got so much history about Vincent van Gogh's great-grandfather's origins, who was nobody, but we didn't get a definition of Impressionism.
Yeah.
Which I think was important. That's what what he was fighting against.
Yeah.
And
I had to look up after this.
Was he an impressionist by the end?
Post-impressionist. He was post-impressionist.
Okay, yeah, see,
I had to look it up.
I think he did briefly try in one letter, and then immediately sent that's what I loved about Vincent. He would just he would full text, just blue text. Just like, Theo didn't even get your first letter, dude. Yeah. You're literally arguing against yourself here.
Sending
just immediately
follow
up a letter. So he's like, what's this Impressionism movement? And then you would think that he tried it or something. Next day, this sucks. I hate it. Like, what happened?
Imagine him texting, woof.
Oh my God.
He did say, the author was saying at one point, and I don't remember what argument they were having, but Vincent ended up arguing both sides in his letters. He was writing to support both sides of it and sending them simultaneously. Before Theo even received them, had argued both sides of the argument via post.
Right.
Via post. Dude, the sheer postage bill on it. That would have been an interesting part of the book. We heard how much he spent on easels and models.
Yeah.
That was also interesting too. Just the sheer expenditure on physical people. When I'm pretty sure cameras existed at that point, but just no.
He wasn't gonna do that. Yeah. That wasn't it.
That was not it.
Well, before we say then what books we would recommend to our listeners to maybe enjoy something a little bit more like in the same vein as this, I wanted to hear what you guys thought of as it, and I'll share mine first. So it to me was waking up in our aunt's house in Cape Cod on the beach early in the morning when no one's up yet. It to me is a glass of wine and a pasta dish at a local restaurant with my husband. And it to me was walking out down to the dock at Grandma and Grandpa's and looking out on Savannah Lake. Those I felt those really called to me. Not it in the sense of Vincent van Gogh, but it to me is that's it. That's what I'm looking for in life.
That's
stuff. Those three things just really came to me.
Those are good. I don't think I have anything that structured. I think Phoebe got the benefit of preparing that question. The I think it for me. One of them is eating Ethiopian food with now my wife.
My wife.
In DC at our favorite my wife at our favorite spot. I think I don't know what smell, but there's a range of smells that are just so nostalgic. One of them is bug spray mixed with cut grass is just like cousins.
Yeah.
Boom, right there. But a good nostalgic smell is really the smell of the beach is another one, like the Cape Cod. And then I think the last one is like every time we go home, we end up laughing at the dinner table about the dumbest shit. And the last time was you can just cut this and send it to dad.
No, I'll just say for our listeners, we had to cut out an embarrassing story, but needless to say, Phil, that's a great one.
Yeah, those are my it.
What about you, Isaac?
Nice.
What are your it? What's it to you?
So it for me is when you either meet or just experience these people that you can see the passion in them, and you can see both their want and their like almost like a need to be invested in this thing that they're doing. So, and I think this can go multiple different ways. So the first example is you meet someone who like is just this normal dude but has this hobby that is very interesting and they love it. And they can talk to you about it in a not annoying way, but in a way that you leave there and you're like, wow, I should get into that too. I'm going to go home and research how to do that because I'm so into that. So there's kind of like that vein of it. But then there's also the vein of people who are just there doing the thing. Like, you know that this is not their like dream thing to be doing, but they're doing it with everything they have and they are so good at it. So the thing that is I always think of is, the fast food worker that their service is like impeccable.
Dude,
they like take your order and they're smiling at you. They tell you to have a good day. They wipe up the counter before they put their thing down. And you're just like, you didn't have to do any of this. You could have probably just spit into my food and brought it out to me and I still would have eaten because I'm eating this fake thing anyway.
Right.
But the fact that you just had like so much care in what you were doing. So that's just like, those like all melded into that thing is what it is for me.
I love that, Isaac.
Dare I say that Vincent van Gogh had it, not the it he was seeking, but Isaac's it.
Yeah, and which is it. You struggle with him because I can appreciate that obsession of this thing. What I cannot appreciate though is the fact that he never supported himself at all. So like, he didn't do anything about it. When his brother, who is literally selling art for a living, he writes him back saying, Vincent, you're not on it. No one is going to buy this. Do these 3 things and I will sell whatever you send me. And then you continue doing your crazy drawings of stuff that makes absolutely no sense that people hate because you're now making money off the things that you're doing exactly what I tell you to do. But the fact that he just fought every single person who seemingly was trying to help him along the way, you're just like, I can't root for you. So there he lost the it. But if he had just done that, he would have had my it for sure.
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah, no, that was a really good discussion. Actually, definitely much more enjoyable than reading the book. I highly recommend to our listeners to maybe just come on, listen to the podcast. I think we'll give you a pretty good view into who was Vincent van Gogh and the main topics of Van Gogh, the life. And I wanted to hear and share with you guys too my recommendation for if you liked Van Gogh, the life, or if you're looking for something a little bit better, more similar, but in the same vein. And mine would have been The Splendid and the Vile. It is by Eric Larson. And I don't read a lot of nonfiction, so I will say that up front. So this is one of the only nonfictions that I've really, really enjoyed. It's a fabulous book. It is about the diarists in World War II. And so that's why kind of I liked your idea, Phil, about we should have just taken the letters and put it in the book, because that's the author provides commentary in The Splendid and the Vile, but it's based largely on diarists during World War II, and it surrounds Winston Churchill, who's a very interesting guy. And I think Van Gogh could have been portrayed in much the same way that that Churchill was, not making a comparison there, but it could have been written more like Splendid and the Vile, and I think our readers would have enjoyed it more. So that's my recommendation to everybody. It's a great book. I recommend it to a lot of people. Isaac, what would you recommend to people if they are looking for something like Van Gogh, The Life?
Yeah, there's as far as this is another biography recommendation. Leadership in Turbulent Times is by Doris Kearns Goodwin. It's biographies of Lincoln, Roosevelt, FDR, and Lyndon B. Johnson. And she gives kind of a brief summary of each of them, but then compares their leadership style. So there's a compare contrast across the four, which is cool as well. Way more enjoyable than this book.
Kind of like my idea, I feel like, of following several different people. That sounds good. Phil, what about you? What would you recommend to people?
Yeah. So if you liked this, I do think that like the book of Leviticus or 1 or 2 Chronicles in the Bible is your speed. Just a list of really boring shit. If you have a if
We've just recommended
like
the
this,
Old Testament, ladies and gentlemen.
if you didn't like this, I think that one of the nonfictions I read that I do read a lot of nonfiction. It's A Wager, A Tale of Shipwreck, Mutiny, and Murder. And it's a true story written by David Gran, who also wrote Killers of the Flower Moon.
Oh.
So he just published this one in 2023. Really good. But yeah, I don't have much literature. If you did enjoy this, I think a history education is your thing. Just really dry.
Well, and I realize now too, you guys, I kind of skipped over our ratings, but I think potentially we don't need to go too deep. Across the board, we were zeros for all of the above, and so we can just kind of move right along. I'm not sad we read it because we got to have this conversation, but outside of that, do not recommend to a friend. And I think Isaac and I also shared the same.
To an enemy.
What? Not recommend to an enemy. I mean,
I was also just going to say, Isaac and I don't know that we finished anything else in the 2 weeks that we've last met because we were trying to finish this book. But Phil, it looks like you did. So do you want to tell us what book you read recently that you enjoyed?
I read a couple because I had a lot of long drives. R.S. Ford, Age of Uprising series was the closest thing to Game of Thrones that I've ever read in my entire life. Not due to the fact it was not medieval. It was just with the actual viewpoints, the twists, the intricacies in political drama, as well as like sporadic wars. Wildly similar, completely different world and subject matter, a little bit more technological and magical. Thought it was really good. I'm waiting on the third one.
Cool.
And then I did read just sort of a burner by Lisa Gardner called Alone. I wanted a good detective one. Didn't really get it. Wouldn't recommend. But,
darn.
Yeah.
Nice. That first one sounded really good. I would be very interested to read that, actually, now that I'm done with Vincent Van Gogh. And I did start reading There. We will be discussing that on the 26th of August. That'll be Book Club 18. This was Book Club 17, if anybody's interested. And before we go, Isaac, I just wanted to have us share really quickly what There is about.
There is by Tommy Orange. It's a powerful novel that weaves together the stories of 12 characters from the urban Native American community in Oakland, California. Through their interconnected narratives, the book explores themes of identity, belonging, and the impact of historical trauma on Indigenous peoples.
I'm excited about this one. I like a book that follows many different plots to get to kind of a central point. And so also, I just keep being blown away by our book list and the variety that we've kind of put forth on this, for better or worse. I hope our listeners
I think it's good.
Agree. Yeah.
hope it turns
Yeah.
out well this time.
Yeah. Well, since we are coming to a close, I will just take this time to remind our listeners to call somebody that you love, tell them that you love them, tell them about a good book that you've read recently. It will likely not be Van Gogh the Life, but maybe give them some suggestions that we gave you on this podcast. Go to your local library or use your Libby app. And until we meet again, stay classy, second pagers. Bye, you guys.
Bye, guys.
See you guys.
On the first page.